It's no secret that the landscape of the UFC is changing dramatically. A lot of these old legends have retired, and a ton of these new fighters are fighting for GOAT status. And that's why in this video, we're going to go through how every UFC champion can become GOAT. Starting with Khamzat Chimaev, the most recent champion. I think he has a pretty long way, just considering that he just became champion. But what does help him is the fact that he dominated one of the most dominant champs in the UFC. Top 5 pound for pound champion, Du Plessis. He controlled him for 5 rounds straight and proved the whole cardio narrative wrong. I think what Khamzat needs to become GOAT is to win up a division, beating a guy like Ankalaev or Pereira if he's champion to win a second belt, a few title defenses. I think he needs some title defenses as well, but I think we're past the era of just ranking champions by the amount of title defenses. The UFC is much more competitive than it was back then, and a few high quality wins now is as good as 10 wins back then. And I think there are some really tough tests at middleweight, and I think Khamzat Chimaev can build a good resume fighting the contenders in his division. So I think if he defends his belt against a guy like a Mavov, Rainer de Ritter, Anthony Hernandez, guys like that, and he can get a super fight and win, I think it would be hard to deny him from being GOAT, especially the fact that he's undefeated. He has that undefeated aura. He would go out like Khabib, except he would have much more quality wins. And I think it would be really hard to deny him as GOAT. If he doesn't get that super fight though, or he loses against that super fight, then kind of like everybody else, he's going to have to get tons of wins and dominant wins in his division. But for Islam Makhachev, he, in my opinion, is the closest to GOAT status right now. And I think if he beats JDM, especially if it's decisively, he could already be considered GOAT. I would consider him the GOAT if he beats JDM decisively. But if he has a close decision with JDM, I think to really secure him as GOAT, he would need a defense against a guy like Shavkat Rakhmonov. And that would pretty much make him undeniable. He's beaten guys like Volkanovski, Charles Oliveira. Those level of opponents, Jones has really never fought, besides Daniel Cormier, really. But if he loses against JDM, which I'm predicting him to do, I think he has a little more work to do. I think he would have to beat Ilia Topuria. That's like a non-negotiable, but I think he would also have to beat Arman Tsarukyan, and both of those wins would have to be dominant. If he eked out a decision against Topuria or had a close decision with Arman, it would still be pretty hard to put him as undisputed GOAT. He really needs to win up at welterweight to secure his GOAT status. But for Ilia Topuria, I think he just needs to beat Islam Makhachev, because we know the way he would beat Islam Makhachev, which is by knockout. And especially if Islam Makhachev is coming off of a win at welterweight and Ilia Topuria moves up to welterweight and beats Islam, you could not deny that he's the GOAT. He would be a 3-division champion. He would be pretty much the GOAT at that time, and it would be probably the most impressive win in history. But if he beats Islam coming off of a loss, I think to really secure himself to be undisputed would be to beat Arman, because people would not shut up about Arman Tsarukyan. They would say he's still ducking him. Having that win would leave no questions about Ilia Topuria. And also, if Islam Makhachev's coming off a loss, it would be at 155, where Islam would have less of a size advantage. But another guy who's not far away from becoming GOAT is Merab. He has a fight against Sandhagen. He obviously needs to win that fight. But after that, I think he needs to beat Umar and get one more win against a contender. And the main reason is because Merab has tons of high-level competition and quality wins, but compared to guys like Topuria, who's fighting Volkanovski and finishing him in the second round, and Islam Makhachev, who's fighting Volkanovski, and Charles Oliveira, Merab's wins aren't as high-level as those wins. He doesn't have that high level of competition, so I think he would need a little more quantity. And if he got a decisive win against Umar in their rematch, that could already put him in the conversation. But I think one more new contender on top of that would clearly put him as GOAT. But I think the more simpler option is if right now Merab went up and beat Volkanovski, especially again if it's decisively, you could already argue that he's the GOAT there. Volkanovski, yeah, he's not as good as he was in his prime. I think he's slightly getting worse, but it's still pretty much damn near prime Volk that he would have beaten. Being a weight class lower, it's not like Islam Makhachev, who was a weight class above. Merab's a weight class lower, and he's smaller than Volk. If he was to get that win, I think already you could call him GOAT. But Tom Aspinall is probably the most difficult one. And I'm going to be honest, I don't even know. I don't. He's just going to have to fight an insane amount of quality. And even if he does, that might not even be enough. You're talking about the worst division of all time, in my opinion. I don't think there's ever been division this void of talent. It's horrible. And he has 2 semi-tough tests, if you even want to call it that, which is Cyril Gane and Jailton Almeida. But other than that, I mean, the rest of these guys are just nowhere near any other contender. Unranked lightweights are better than the best ranked heavyweight, to be honest. And I think the only way Aspinall could possibly put himself in the GOAT conversation is if he just has an insane amount of quality and is champ for 10 years straight and just gets first round finishes every single time, or he gets wins against guys moving up like Ankalaev or maybe Pereira, because those are a lot more high quality. That proves a lot more, but still it doesn't prove as much because he's up a weight class. It's really hard for Tom Aspinall. I don't even know if it's possible that this guy can be considered GOAT because he just doesn't have anyone to even really fight. And for Ankalaev, I think if he beats Alex Pereira, but decisively by knockout, which I think he will do and can do, if he went up and fought Tom Aspinall and won, instant GOAT. It would be super hard to argue beating a Hall of Fame level fighter, Alex Pereira, not even Hall of Fame, like top 20 GOAT, Alex Pereira, and finishing him in the second fight, and then moving up and fighting Tom Aspinall, who everyone was pretty much picking to beat John Jones. But that's pretty unrealistic because it's not likely that he goes up to fight Tom Aspinall just after beating Alex Pereira. He's probably going to stay at light heavyweight. And if he does that, he's going to have a lot of work to do because, again, light heavyweight's not super competitive. Ankalaev would only be off of 1 title defense. I think you'd have to beat Erie. He would have to beat a lot of new contenders and just top contenders in general. And maybe, have some fights where Chimaev goes up and he fights Chimaev and wins. That would help him a lot too. But for Volkanovski, this is a really hard one because, he's lost to a few guys that fighting for GOAT status right now. He's lost to Islam Makhachev and he's lost to Ilia Topuria. I think he needs to get one of those wins back just because of the fact that he lost dominantly to both of them. The Islam Makhachev fight, you can say is short notice. That's a decent criticism. But Ilia Topuria, there's no excuses. I don't want to hear that head kick shit where people are saying that he was chinny. We know if Ilia Topuria hits you like that, you're fucking done for, dude. In no world would Volk ever survive a punch like that. In no world would Tom Aspinall survive a punch like that. If anybody gets hit by a punch like that Ilia Topuria threw, you get knocked out. Like, I don't know how people think you could ever eat a punch like that. I think he needs to get one of those wins back. And if not, maybe if he beats, Mavzar decisively, Lerone Murphy decisively, Gene Silva decisively, a lot of these new contenders decisively, you could make an argument. But if not, he's going to have to avenge one of those losses. And for JDM, another very new champion, he's going to have to do a lot of work. I think he would need to beat Islam Makhachev decisively, beat Shavkat Rakhmonov, beat Ian Gary, beat pretty much every new contender we have, like Sean Brady at welterweight. If he gets tons of those wins and they're all very good wins, great performances, pretty decisive, I think that's the way for him. Obviously, if he went up and did some super fight like Khamzat, of course he would, propel himself super far, especially if Khamzat has a couple defenses under his belt. That would be the way. And I don't think he's a ton of wins away because fighting a guy like Islam Makhachev is the best start to any championship defense you can ever have. The only thing I would say is that Islam Makhachev is coming from a weight below, so it takes a little bit of the, credibility off of it, but it still would be the most impressive win he could have right now in his career. And then he would fight an undefeated guy like Shavkat. He'd fight maybe Sean Brady. Tons of these new contenders that look insane. And then especially if he went up and fought Khamzat and got a win like that, I mean, he could, if everything went perfectly, become GOAT in like 5 fights or 4 fights. For Pantoja, though, I honestly don't think he's that far away. The only thing holding him back is the fact that he's a flyweight. Opponents he fights aren't huge names. They're not as competitive as, the lightweight division, but they're still competitive. They're still really good opponents. And Pantoja is one of the most dominant champions in the UFC right now. I think Pantoja could become GOAT in 1 fight, and that's if he goes up to 135 and beats Merab. Because to me, I think that's an next to impossible fight for him to win. And if he could win that, considering everything he's done at flyweight, all the defenses he has, I think that's instant GOAT status. I'm not gonna lie. And if not, if he never goes up to 135, he's gonna have to fight a lot more. He just is. Like, it's pretty hard to become GOAT and for people to consider you GOAT by just getting wins at flyweight. I mean, look at Demetrius Johnson. He has a million title defenses and people don't even consider him, top 3. So the best way and the simplest way for Pantoja to become become the undisputed GOAT is to go up and beat an absolute top pound for pound fighter and legend like Merab, a guy who himself is not far away from GOAT status. But that's what I think every UFC champion needs to become the greatest of all time in the UFC.